Hello, this is Mike again. We are now starting week 2. I'm recording this Saturday, before school started, trying to get a little bit ahead. But I wanted to go ahead and let you know, I'm assuming we'll have a great start to this week. The second video of this week, I will wait until the Sunday before the week, and I'll give you a little bit more updates, and then we'll get started from there. But anyway, make sure that if you have questions, email me directly. There is the FAQ section in the Blackboard. But that's primarily more for general questions. If you have questions about grades, questions about test questions, things like that, just email me directly, or come down and see me in my office, 1275 in Levenger Building. So anyway, let me go ahead and check things off here. In week 2, you're going to be reading about planning and providing special education services and information introducing language and concepts of differentiated instruction. And then also Chapter 3, collaborating with families. Chapter 3, collaborating with families, does have a pretty extensive discussion board this week. You will be doing a module on transitioncoalition.org. I would suggest that even though we are starting with Chapter 2 at the beginning of the week, that you at least create a free username on that site and get a little bit of time in. It could take you an hour or so to complete the module, and then you have a discussion board post concerning that. So just a little bit of tidbit of information to hopefully help you with that. So you're going to have Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, discussions for Chapter 2 and 3, and then you'll have a test over 1, 2, and 3 at the end of the week on Sunday. I will open that test Friday, and it will be open until Sunday night. It does have a 2-hour time limit, and you also cannot backtrack to a previous question on that one. In week 2 module, you'll need to read Chapter 2, read the chapter, download and view the PowerPoint, look over documents, and then once you get done with Chapter 2 and the discussion board, remember Chapter 2's discussion board ought to be posted by Wednesday to get full points, and then Chapter 3's ought to be posted Thursday evening to get points on that, and then you'll need to go throughout the week. With Chapter 3's being a little different, read the instructions on that to help you there. And then Chapter 3 will be coming up on Thursday. I'll have the video ready to go early in the week, but that's kind of where that lies. Then make sure you go back to discussion boards throughout the weekend to go ahead and get full points on those. You respond to your posts, respond to people that commented on yours to get a good idea, and that'll give you an idea of what you need to do this week. Remember to email me if you have any questions. There's also the FAQ for general questions. Talk about that. So let's go ahead and get started into Chapter 2, planning and providing services for special education. You'll see on here every week, starting this week, week 2, I will try to have some sort of review about what we've done before. And here, what I would always suggest is go ahead and try to answer these questions on a piece of paper, and then the next PowerPoint slide will have your answers, what the answers should be. So like on this one, Tanner was born without one of his hands. Does he have a disability, an impairment, or a handicap? So go ahead and write that down. What do you think that is? Okay, you can pause the video. I'm going to go ahead and go on to question 2. And then once you get done with question 1, you can play it and you'll be ready for question 2. Describe and explain 4 of the 6 major principles of IDEA. So go ahead and take some time and write down what you can remember about the principles of IDEA. There are 6 of them that we were discussing in Chapter 1. So you can pause the video and go ahead and write down your answers. Then for number 3, list the dimensions, defining characteristics of special education, and describe or explain 4 of them. So this one might take a little more time. Go ahead and write down your answers. Go and click pause on the video. And here in a few seconds, then we will go and talk about the next slide. Okay, you'll notice that you should have chosen an impairment. Tanner would have an impairment when he was born without one of his hands, not a disability or a handicap, just by the information that was given. And that's on page 7, if you want to look at that again. Describe and explain 4 of the 6 major principles. Well, there was 0 reject, non-discriminatory identification, evaluation, FAPE, free and appropriate public education, LRE, least restrictive environment, there's due process, and then parent-student participation was the 6th one. So in the actual part, then you would want to explain or describe them, and I'll give you a little hint. You might see this on the test coming up at the end of this week. So if you can remember that and kind of explain what each one is, then you will be ready for the review questions on there. And that's on page 16. Then list dimensions, defining characteristics of special education, and describe or explain 4 of them. Again, hint, this might be something you'll want to write down to help you on the upcoming test over 1, 2, and 3 on Sunday. Individually planned, specialized, intensive, goal-directed, research-based methods, and guided by student performance are the possible answers. And that's on page 34. While we're going through this, I would recommend that you print out the review sheet for 1, 2, and 3 early this week, and that way you can go ahead and start looking into what you need to do. Nash, what are you doing? Sorry, dog decided to get up. So anyway, there is that question there. Now let's go into question concerns. These next few items are areas that came up with the test questions for Chapter 2 in the past. So I wanted to go ahead and get them up here for you also. So the next few, that's what those are. So I'm going to bypass those and go ahead and get into the first slide, which is the process of special education. You can go back and look at those chapter objectives and the questions at a later date. But the process of special education, there's the first one is the pre-referral, and that's to provide immediate instruction and or behavioral assistance. Pre-referral intervention is conducted by a building-based early intervention assistance team. And I will say, do not be a teacher that a parent comes up to you during parent-teacher conferences or just comes in and talks to you and says, I think my son or daughter might be a special education student or might need some more assistance. Don't just let that lie and not say anything. Find the person in your building. It might be a process coordinator. It might be another special education teacher. It might be your principal. Find them, let them know, because that actually started, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit, that actually started, or should have started, the process of evaluation for possible consideration for special ed services. And there are special ed timelines that must be looked at, and we'll discuss that. So remember now, and I'll say it again over the course of this class, always, if a parent or somebody talks to you, Nash, come on. So, sorry about that. Place. Go on. Place. Anyway. The pre-referral. We have certain dates. Within 30 days, you've got to have a meeting if a parent suggests or requests possible special ed services. And this has to be looked at. So don't be the person that 2 weeks after parent-teacher conferences, you let the special ed teacher know. By that time, there's already 2 weeks gone in their timeline, and that means there's only 2 weeks left to start the process of deciding whether the student might be a special ed student. So anyway, evaluation and eligibility determination. All children suspected of having a disability must receive that non-discriminatory, multi-faceted evaluation. The MFE is conducted by a school-based multidisciplinary team. Program planning, an individualized education program, or IEP as we will be calling it here in a little while, must be developed for children identified as having that disability. Placement, it's in red, so remember what that means. That means probably going to be on a test or a quiz. The IEP team must determine the least restrictive educational environment. That's that LRE that meets the student's needs. This might be regular ed classroom, it might be a special ed classroom, it might be a resource room. That's what the team decides. Not the parent, not the student, not one person. The team decides. Ongoing monitoring of the student progress and the IEP must be reviewed on an annual basis, and a reevaluation is every 3 years. Initial referral process. The link above, I'd like for you to go to that link. I'm going to go for it here in a second, but it's going to take you to DESE's webpage where you can look at different PDFs for initial process, initial evaluation process, parent referral, agency referral, or the referral process. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that. Okay, and you'll see initial evaluation, detailed. We're going to go to the brief one on this one to kind of get an idea here of what this might look like. This is an agency referral, which typically would be the school district itself. A teacher might see a problem that they think might be a special education issue and go to a special ed teacher or the process coordinator on this. So you've got the regular education activities. The student teacher attempts classroom strategies and interventions. District may use care teams or mechanisms to collaborate and determine if all appropriate strategies have been used. No particular timeline on that one. When it's in district, your timelines don't start until a teacher refers. So a lot of times teachers will talk to other teachers, look for strategies. They might talk to a special ed teacher to kind of get some strategies and start using them. But if they don't work, then they may go and talk to the SPED teacher or a process coordinator about a special ed referral. So there's the referral date that I'm talking about there. Date agency determined there is a reason to suspect a disability. And so there you're going to provide procedural safeguards within 5 school days of that teacher's referral, meaning that the process coordinator is going to call the parent up and explain that their name has popped up, or a teacher talked to them about the possibility that their son or daughter might be a student with a special need. And with that, they will send procedural safeguards, which explain the process, and would typically explain the process to the parent or parents at that point in time so that they understood their rights, their responsibilities, and what the school would be doing from here, and explain the timeline. So within 30 days of that conversation, then they need to conduct a review of existing data, or some districts call it the RED, R-E-D, review of existing data. And the process coordinator will gather data. It may be past history of classes and scores. It might be assessments that are in that. It might be reading scores, math scores, writing scores from the teachers. Any type of data that they can use. It will be going to the nurse, finding out if there's any vision problems or hearing problems or health problems that go along with this, because you'd want to get them taken care of before you started any testing. So typically that's going to be the first thing that I did, was talk to the nurse, make sure there was no vision problems in the past, because most school districts automatically do vision and hearing tests, so you don't have to have the evaluation full-blown and signed yet by the parent on that, because that's given to all students. So anything that's given to all students, that special ed coordinator is going to be looking at to see if there's anything that might pop up that student might have. Then during that 30-day time, they're going to go ahead and call the parent, have them come in for a meeting. They will discuss whether they think there's a special ed need. If there isn't, they don't feel like there's a special ed need yet, then this is where it would stop. The parent would sign off on it, and they would return to regular education. Maybe there was a reading vision problem that came up, and once it was corrected, there was really no special ed need. It was just needed glasses. Or maybe there was a hearing problem detected, and so they're not sure that it's really a special ed need yet. They're going to wait. They're going to look at the student, have the student get the hearing figured out, and then see what happens. However, if the team does decide that that student is possibly a special education student, then they're going to start the evaluation process. There will be some signatures needed by the parent. They will go through an evaluation plan that says what they're going to test, what they feel they would like to test. And as long as the team comes up with this and the parent signs off, then you have 60 days from this date to do all of the testing and evaluation needed to determine if that student is a special education student. Before that 60 days is up, you're going to go ahead and conduct the meeting after all the testing is done to determine eligibility. If there's found no eligibility, then a notice of action is signed stating that there was no eligibility and that student returns to special education. However, if the team sees data that the student does qualify under eligibility as a special ed student, then they will sign off on that. They will let the parent know that they will start getting an IEP put together based on the data on that evaluation plan. And then within 30 days, we'll meet again to discuss the IEP, get it discussed, and sign off on that. And that way parents and everybody is ready to go with this. So that's what we need to do next. Then we will go on. That's kind of the evaluation process. So let's go back here and kind of see. You can go ahead and click some of the other ones. If it's a parent referral, the only difference is it starts immediately when that parent made a comment. Whether it was any district employee, if that parent made a comment about a special education need, then that is when the dates start. There is no time just to sit and see about a special ed. It immediately starts right there at that time. And then the reevaluation process every 3 years after the student has become eligible for special ed services, the team meets again to see if there's anything that they might need to test on, to reevaluate, and double check some things on that IEP and the evaluation. And you don't have to test on the evaluation. Generally speaking, no. If it's a elementary student by late 4th, 5th grade, they might do another evaluation with testing, and then definitely in the high school area you will want to do some testing to make sure they're ready for post-secondary. Disproportionate representation talks about the definition. Disproportionate representation exists when a particular group receives special education at a rate significantly higher or lower than what would be expected. And DESE tends to do a good job of checking with school districts, looking at their percentages and things like that. So you want to make sure you understand those. Whoops, I all of a sudden went way down on there. There we go. There's another slide for disproportionate representation. Let's go down to the causes. Are students from some ethnic groups more likely to have a disability? There are some mentioned in the books. African Americans in some areas do have a higher percentage. Sometimes in different categories, males have a higher percentage than females. We'll get into those as we get into the different disability types. Do inherent problems in the referral and placement process bias the identification of minority children? Well, there is some evidence that testing in some areas may be a little bit biased questions. That's why a lot of times too, if the student has a main language that is not English, that we are required to do the testing as close as possible to their native language so that there's not as much of a bias on that. So those are some items there. Combating cultural and racial bias in referral and identification. You'll need to know the factors that contribute to disproportionality and talks about leading to biased referrals. So you'll need to know that information from the book. So make sure you go back and read through that. Collaboration and teaming. Special education is a team game. It's not a special educator that makes the rules. We follow the guidelines of DESE, which follows the national guidelines. for identification of a student with a disability. So we do have things that we have to do. Collaboration. Teachers are better able to diagnose and solve problems in the classroom when they work together. And talks about coordination. And I'm going to go ahead and take this. I want to correct something here. Let me try it one more time. There we go. Not all of the words were on the screen there. Consultation. Team members provide information and expertise to one another. There's coordination, ongoing communication, and cooperation to ensure that services are provided in a timely and systematic fashion. It all depends on how each school district handles different things as far as how the teachers collaborate. And that's not just regular ed, that's talking about the whole team. That might be the special ed teacher, it might be the speech and language pathologist or SLP, it might be the a person working with students with fine motor skills, it might be a person working with the gross motor skills, it might be the PE teacher, it might be specials, it could be a lot of different categories, maybe an autism consultant. So each school district will be a little bit different. There's different team methods. There's multidisciplinary team, there's interdisciplinary team, and then transdisciplinary teams. So look through those. Make sure you know what difference between those three teams for the upcoming test. Co-teaching. Most of you have had some experience with co-teaching, and it has various forms. There's one teaching, one helping. There's parallel teaching, station teaching, alternative teaching, and team teaching. It should not be the special ed teacher sitting in the back of the room just helping students out. That is not co-teaching. Co-teaching is utilizing the best resources of each teacher. Many times it means switching off, and the special ed teacher may have a group of students that is not all special ed students. It might be the regular ed teacher teaching the special ed students. It just depends on how they do that. But you need to go through and understand each of those forms. There is meticulous planning, open communication, and flexibility that are keys to co-teaching. Because you do need that extra time. Not only will you have regular plan time, but if you're co-teaching, you need to have some time with your co-teacher to plan ahead and know what you're needing to do. I'd look over the group discussion questions to get an idea. There are, if you look at the notes there are some notes in with that slide that I would typically do in a face-to-face. I'm going to leave that there just so you have some ideas, and you need to probably go through. It would be highly suggested to at least go through and see what your thoughts are on those questions, and you can always email me on those. We're going to go to the IEP. The Individualized Education Program, the heart of an IDEA, and the make or break component of FAPE to every child with a disability. It requires that an IEP be developed and implemented for every student with disability ages 3 to 21, and their individualized service plans, their family service plans, are developed for infants and toddlers birth to 3, so IFSPs, and we'll discuss those when we get to the early childhood chapter of this particular book. You will need to know the IEP team, the next slide. Those 7 members you need to make sure you know. The parents, when appropriate, the child, and we'll discuss more about that and my perceptions and my hopes for you on that. General education teacher, special ed teacher, the LEA representative, we'll talk about that. An individual who can interpret evaluation results, and others at the discretion of the parents or school. The parents should always be invited and always asked to come. However, I know there's been times that after 2 meeting invites, and we'll discuss that a little bit, the parents didn't come and we needed to do the IEP. Remember, we do have timelines and guidelines. The IEP must be written before every yearly annual date comes up. So if you're sitting in the last week before that IEP is due and you have sent out 2 meeting invites to parents and talked to parents and they did not come, many programs, many districts will go ahead and have that IEP because they can't go past that date, or they can get in trouble for doing that. The child with a disability, I would highly suggest that at least age 14 on up, you invite the student If it's 16 on up, you have to invite the student. You have to have that student's input in that IEP. I would not, that first IEP meeting, if the student's not able to be there and they're 16 and above, I would reschedule even though the parent is there, because you really want to have that student input. General education teacher, you must have at least one of that student's regular education teacher at the meeting, and I would highly suggest you have as many as you can, and if they can't be there, make sure that you have data and documentation to answer questions that parents may have at that meeting. Special ed teacher must be there, and if there's more than one, definitely the same as a regular ed teacher, I would definitely have them there, and or paper the copy there. LEA representative, they're the ones that can make things happen. They're the ones that give the yay or nay, as far as money, financial. If there's some problems that come up that don't really apply, or there's another option, then that LEA would be the one to bring up the other options and make sure that things can be accomplished through that IEP. And also the individual who interpret evaluation results, sometimes that is a district test person, the person that does all of the testing. Sometimes that is the process coordinator. So they can be both. The LEA rep, sometimes that is a process coordinator or a principal or assistant principal or vice principal, however you want to call them. So it can be one or two people. And then others at the discretion of the parent or school. That might be maybe the school wanting to invite the voc rehab specialist for anybody, voc rehab counselor for those in high school or coming up on that. Maybe it's an agency in town that the district would like to have come in to help with the student. Now, any agency or outside agency that the school wants to invite, they have to get permission before they send a meeting notice. So that means talking to the parent, asking them if you can invite this person, and then putting them on the meeting notice. The parent is asked to do the same thing. The parent is asked to let the student know, or the district know, if they're bringing anybody, but they don't have to alert the district of that. Now, most times that is fine, but I would highly recommend if for some reason you have a parent bring a lawyer or an advocate, you might want to make sure that you understand the situation. You might want to postpone that meeting and make sure that you have a little more information if they bring in a lawyer, so that you kind of have some backup on your side. I haven't come across that, but I have heard districts that have had that problem. So the IEP components, you need to know these. The statement of present levels, or the PLEF, the statement of measurable annual goals, a statement of how the child's progress will be assessed, and a statement of special education related services. Along with the next slide, an explanation as to how the student will not participate, to which the student will not participate in with non-disabled children. I'm having trouble speaking today. A statement of any individual assessment accommodations, and a projected date for the beginning, frequency, location, and duration of services. And we'll talk more about that when we meet and discuss the IEP later this week. IEP components, special factors, you'll want to read through that. There's two different slides that talk about special factors. Functions and format. Teachers and families with the opportunities to be realistic about child's goals and creative on how to meet those goals, and a measure of accountability for teachers and schools, while also formats may vary widely across school districts. And I'll try to talk more about that directly when we meet. It's not the same as curriculum. The IEP objectives are not comprehensive enough to cover the entire scope. Each area of functioning that is adversely affected by the student's disability must be represented by a goal. And all of those are discussed in that PLEF, and that's in turn where you get your goals. So you're going to start with the PLEF, and then you're going to find out what goals and what ideas you think are needing to be worked with, and then those are going to become goals later on in the IEP. Problems and potential solutions. Inconsistencies between what is written in the document and the instruction that they receive in the classroom. We need to watch that. Students' presence at meetings can at best be viewed as tokenism. Make sure that they know what they're doing. By 6th, 7th grade, they need to know what their IEP is. They need to know what their disability is. They need to know why. And then before that, I would make sure that, if at all possible, the student understand helps with those. And we'll talk more about that too. High quality instruction is needed for students to make progress, and it requires IDEA 2004 requires teachers to use evidence-based practices to do that. The continuum of placement. There's a range of placement types. There's at least need for specially designed instruction supports. Many number of students are different. Classes with consultation. There's general ed classroom with supplementary services, and there's a resource room, and possibly after that, self-contained might be the next part. Here are some placement alternatives. They might be homebound. They might have sickness or an illness that takes them out of the school district, and so the school district must provide some sort of services and related services at home or in the hospital. Now, those services are not the same as the amount of minutes in their IEP, just because if they're in the hospital, they're not going to be able to concentrate. They're not going to be able to continue having the same services. So they may get 5 hours or 6 hours of instruction when they're at school, but in the hospital setting or homebound, it may only be 30 minutes or an hour, and that student will work on what they can. And then as they can work more and more with their goals and with their work, then might be coming back to school part-time and then back to school full-time, work them back in. There's residential school, where the student receives education-related services by a specially trained staff in a residential facility in which children receive care and service 24 hours a day. There's separate school special education services under the direction of specially trained staff. And then there's separate classroom, where the student attends a special class for most or all of the school day. I'm going to go ahead and try to get that all in there too. I changed these slides, and one more. Give y'all a little breather. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, the next part, determining at least restrictive environment. Removal from the general ed classroom should take place when the severity of the disability is such that an appropriate education cannot be achieved. That should be the first and primary goal of where that student should start. It doesn't start at the bottom where the student is in a self-contained classroom or even outside in residential typically. It's going to start with regular ed classroom and then maybe with support. Then maybe co-teaching environment, and then maybe a resource room might be provided. So the team decides that, but it must start in the regular ed classroom, that conversation, and then work their way down. The next one is kind of a continuum of services. It kind of helps look at that. I suggest you look at that after the video a little bit more. That will definitely give you an idea. There's inclusive education, students' disabilities in general ed classroom. Inclusive classrooms, LRE, are one and the same, but that is not always so. So yes, the LRE would like for them all to be in the regular classroom, but due to their disability, they may not be. So that's what the team decides. Promoting an inclusion with cooperative learning. Many of our students work better when they're in groups and using some type of cooperative learning. So I would definitely look at looking at some of that. Arguments for and against full inclusion. Full inclusion contends that LRE confuses segregation and integration with intensity in services, requires a readiness model, requires people to move as they develop change. So, one of the things with an IEP, if they start in the regular classroom and over a semester or over time, the teachers and the team decide they might need to be put into a resource room setting where they get instruction in a regular ed setting, and then they go for maybe 30 minutes 3 or 4 times a week to the special ed setting to get more intensive training or instruction in a certain area. Then they can call an IEP meeting and they can get that change and do that. Or it could be the other way too, where those students start off maybe in a self-contained or a resource setting, and they're doing well enough where they start moving them back into maybe a co-teaching environment. So it can go both ways. Very few special educators support eliminating the continuum of alternative placements in favor of universal full inclusion. While there are some studies out there, many of teachers that I know too agree with what the book is saying. each team needs to look at each student separately and see what they deserve and how they are going to learn best. So look at those arguments for and against. That one there. Where does special education go from here? The promise of FAPE is an ambitious one. There are problems and concerns with implementation of IDEA. There's insufficient funding many years from the federal government. There is a lot of paperwork. So if you're wanting to be a special ed teacher, be ready for that. But I tend to think as long as you're on top of it, as long as you are good at organization skills, it's not going to be that bad. If you're a procrastinator and have difficulty with organization, you might want to work on that. Unclear guidelines and inappropriate grouping of students with disabilities sometimes. Overrepresentation of students from diverse groups. We talked a little bit about that. And lack of training or support for general education teachers when students with disabilities are included in their classroom. My hope and ambition is that many school districts do a good job now of helping teachers understand. Many times in my school district, I would call teachers in before school started and discuss, especially the ones maybe that had behavior plans, maybe those that were autistic, maybe some of the other health impaired items with ADHD, and bring those teachers in to discuss what has worked in the past so that they have a better understanding of what's going on and what they could do with that. So hopefully that's not that big of a deal. Special education is at a crossroad. Today, all children identified with disabilities receive special ed related services. The educational outcomes for the majority of students with disabilities are disappointing. As a group, they are fairly poor on virtually every measure of academic achievement and social adaptation. We need good teachers out there. So, my hope and ambition is that each of you in this class will be one of those next good teachers. That even if you're a regular education teacher, you will have a better understanding of how special education works and where to go for help. This book and this class is not going to train you in every aspect that you will need as a regular education teacher to work with a special ed student. However, the point being is that you will get a little snapshot of each one of the different categories, and then you as a teacher will know where to go and know your resources to get help. And then hopefully at the end of the semester you'll also have some valuable things to come back to. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the differentiated instruction assignment, not the lesson plan, but the actual assignment. And we go through that. Homework for this chapter. You're going to have discussion for Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 this week. You're going to have the quiz for Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 this week. And then you're also going to have the chapter test over 1 through 3. And that's due the 27th. It is going to be open on Friday. So if you get a chance, get things started early this week. Go ahead. I will have the video for Chapter 3 up and going by Monday morning. It does take a little bit of time to get YouTube to get those uploaded. If you ever have problems, make sure and email me and or come see me in my office down in the basement of Levenger in the 1270 suite. Anyway, have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you later on this week.